Welcome to part 2 in the Developing the Curriculum podcast. With this podcast, we'll start discussing Chapter 6 in the textbook. Our objectives for this lesson are to discuss the steps 4 and 5 in the ABC curriculum process. To begin, in my simple mind, I think there's a missing step. Because step 2, we talked about developing the program goals. And step 4, we're going to talk about developing the objectives. Well, when do we develop the content? It just seems like we are missing a step. So let me go over how I see things. As I said, step 2, we develop program goals. Program goals are broad goals for the curriculum. As we discussed, the goals are what each student should learn by the end of the curriculum. Then content are specific activities in each program goal. Easiest way to think of this is they're units of instruction. We have big units that we may cover over weeks, or in college it'd be a chapter, we cover a chapter. We can have several content areas within each of our program goals. So we have program goals, content, and then we have learning objectives. And learning objectives can also be called desired student outcomes, student learning objectives, student yearly learning outcomes. There's multiple different terms for this. These are specific objectives for each content area. The learning objectives are what students should know or do at the end of the class or the unit or the time that you have the students in your class. This step seems to be missing. Again, to me, the step that's missing is developing the content. It's not directly implied, directly stated. It's implied that you're going to develop content and learning objectives in step 4. Now, I like pictures, so this helps me understand how this is supposed to look. We have program goals, and we can have more than just a program goal. This is for one program goal, how this will look. So we can have, let's say we have 3 content areas or 3 units of instruction. Then out of each unit of instruction or content area, we have learning objectives. And our learning objectives should go across the cognitive, psychomotor, and affective domain. And each domain should have its own specific written learning objectives. So as an example, let's say our program goal is physical fitness. Then we're going to have content area of physical concepts, physical principles, and physical strategies. Fitness concepts, fitness principles, fitness strategies. Sorry about that. And then for each one of those 3 content areas, again, we'll have learning objectives across the 3 domains of physical education. Now, Rink on page 241 talks about objectives 2. How she breaks all this down is she talks about we have standard level objectives, which in our case is NASP, or we can have federal, or we can have our state level or our district level. For purposes of this lecture, I talk about NASP. Then based on the NASP or the standard level, we'll develop curriculum level or program goals in the ABC model descriptions. Then for each curriculum level or program level goals, you'll develop unit level or content. Then for each unit level, you're going to develop lesson level objectives or learning objectives. It's the same thing, just different language. So to me, it just makes a little bit more sense if we can see what it should look like and how we can break that down. So step 4, now we finally got to the step. Step 4, we're going to delineate objectives for each goal. Okay, they don't say content, they say objectives. So what we're going to do is break down each program goal into small goals, which again is the content. I suggest that you use broad terms such as tennis, physical fitness, outdoor education, etc. You can have more than one or two words. You can have a sentence. It depends on what you want to do. In just a little bit, I'll give you an example of what I mean by more than just one or two words. The easiest way to think of these is as units or chapters or sections within a larger plan or larger goal. Think about how if you're going to have a goal of physical fitness, and you can break those down into smaller chunks so it's easier for the student to understand that. Then after you develop your goals, or excuse me, you develop your content, then you want to write your learning objectives. So to me this is like step 4B. So the learning objectives are specific statements that describe what students will be able to do after instruction. After they're done, they do the lesson, this is what they should be able to do. And this is also defines what students should learn in the unit or the lesson. I believe that each lesson should have learning objectives or multiple learning objectives. I expect your written learning objectives to be stated in observational and in measurable terms so that anyone can determine if the student has achieved it. And that's from Kelly and Milagro, or however you say that person's name, on page 215 or 115. Now, I think Rink, in her book on pages 239 to 243, which is chapter 11, provides you some really great information when it describes desired student outcomes. And when you write these for this class, I expect them to be written in the same method and written so they are measurable. The student can be assessed, and there's clear description on what a student should know and do by the end of the lesson. So I have some examples for you. This example is from page 117, but I modified it a little bit because they don't have content. It's not put there. Okay, so the program goal in the book is the student will demonstrate mature object control. Okay, so the content is mature object control of an overhand throw. We can have mature object control skill of multiple different things. This one is just specifically for an overhand throw, so that would be the content. That would be the unit, overhand throw. So the DSO, or the learning objective, is given a verbal request to throw a ball in an overhand pattern using the preferred hand, the student will throw a 3-inch, for example, a tennis ball, at least 50 feet on 2 out of 3 trials while demonstrating the following performance standards. Now in the book, they give you all these standards that helps the teacher to assess if a student is performing the skill correctly. Again, we have to think about when we're developing lessons and we're developing our objectives, because our objectives should help us develop, or should drive our lessons. How should we assess learning? That's critical. How do we know if a student is actually learning what they're supposed to learn? And we have to be able to assess that, to evaluate if they have actually learned what they are supposed to have learned. So that's step 4. You're going to develop your content and your learning objectives. Now in step 5 is establishing program goals emphasis. In this step, you're going to determine the emphasis of each program goal in the entire program or curriculum. In this step, you're going to determine how much time should be spent on each program goal and content area. Now, this is a step where I think you just need to read the book. You should use the worksheet on page 326. Again, this is also in the course documents to determine how much time to allocate to each area. You're going to have to do some rank ordering with this, and okay, this is more important than this. You're just going to give it 1, 2, and 3. Now for I'll talk about the learning assignment in just a second. Just so you know, steps 3 and 4 are kind of interwoven a little bit. You develop one, then you develop the next. So in this step, you're just saying that this content is the most important, next, the second most important, third most important, fifth, fourth next most important, in the whole picture of determining your curriculum. So with that in mind, the learning activities. In learning activity 6.1, you'll develop 3 specific content areas for each of your program goals. So if you have 3 program goals, you're going to have 3 specific content areas for each of your program goals. So that'll be a total of 9 content areas. Then in learning activity 2.0, you'll write 3 learning objectives for each of the content areas from learning activity 6.1. I would like you to write 1 cognitive, 1 psychomotor, and 1 affective learning objective. So depending on your program goals, you're going to have many specific content areas. Then the other thing that you need to do is to rank order your content areas. You just got to determine which one's number 1, meaning the most important, second most important, 3. Just if you look at the example completed ABC guides, you'll see how they rank order them. That's step 5, determining which ones you're going to put in most important.